Welcome back, everyone. This week, we're going back to the world of Waterman for another blue ink that has me reevaluating my purchases. In a good way, of course. Maybe I have a thing for blue. Or maybe I have a thing for turquoise. Whatever it is, that quirk in my personality has led me to add this ink into my collection. Well, maybe it's also the price on this 50ml bottle coming out to just under $11 using the Chalet discount code down below. Regardless, Tender Purple and Serenity Blue got me to a point where I'm really glad I went down the budget ink path, and here we are, with a nice, subtle turquoise that can pull itself into a very vibrant blue when it needs to. Now, this week's review is going to have two different looks at this ink, but from the same pen. And that pen would be my 2019 limited edition Vanishing Point with a broad nib. The reason for the two passes, though, is going to be apparent once we get into the notebook. It's probably pretty obvious at first glance why I did the second pass 2 weeks apart, and why I'm now filming this video right at the wire. The top pass was done after having the pen inked up for about a week, and the second pass was done after having written another 30 or 40 pages with this ink. Side note, repurposed pilot cartridges are awesome for making sure you can get an insane amount of ink into your pen. So when I first inked up the pen and did my usual 3 pages of warm-up that I do before starting the review process, I noticed that it was on the lighter shade of turquoise, and a nice light shade at that. I liked the highlights and how they faded into the mids, and the flow was really nice. 2 weeks later, I noticed that the ink was starting at the mid-tones and working more towards the darker tones, but not quite hitting where the ink would sheen. This is a slight disappointment as the lighter shades were really starting to grow on me, and the transition to the darker tones was not subtle. One day I wrote a journal entry with a nice light ink, and less than 24 hours later, I had a piercing blue coming from the pen. Looking at the color profile, though, got me over the disappointment rather quickly. While I would like for it to be able to hit all the notes right from the start, it's the broad range that this ink possesses that has me still liking it. One of these days, I may have to pick an ultimate turquoise ink and ruin my like-dislike ratio with that video, but that's a project for another time. Now, look at the lower right corner. This was unexpected when I first inked this up, especially with how light the ink initially came out. When it gets dark, though, it really gets dynamic. And I like that if you were to put this into a blade nib or another super wet nib, that the sheen would just push this ink right over the top. Now, looking at the dry time and the shading, some of it is expected, and some of it is downright surprising. Both time frames had the ink drying under 15 seconds, but it was the broken in sample on the bottom that dried in under 10. That was a purely unexpected result. On the shading, we had more dynamic range from 1 to 4 passes compared to 2 weeks in, and the shading straight from the nib also highlighted this difference. Now, writing with this ink, I have to say that it's really a pleasure. As far as dry time, it's a dry ink, but it is well lubricated, so there are no flow issues. There is one caveat to that statement, though. This ink can hard start if you leave the pen nib out for a minute or two, so maybe it's more of a medium lubricated than a well lubricated ink. That aside, though, it's a very nice writing experience, and the coloration on the page is what I would expect from a turquoise ink. And the quality that I'm starting to demand from Waterman is also pretty apparent, at least when it's dry. Now, it's been a while since we've been to the kitchen, and since I do these videos via voiceover instead of talking head pieces, I figured we could bring back the extreme water tests. First thing we're gonna do is subject the ink to 2 quick sprays of some household cleaner with bleach. And now we bring on the tap. To be fair, I knew what we were getting into before we got going into this process. And no, it's not just the bleach that did this. The ink gave way just as quick on the sample that I used to help write this script. It's a nice blue ink, but you're going to have to remember to keep it away from moisture and dogs, especially the type of dogs that like to lick things. So bringing it back around, we have a nice blue ink with a good price to volume ratio. It's also got good flow and a nice dynamic range. Just be sure to keep it away from water. All in all, it's a nice ink from Waterman and a good addition to my collection. I just don't think inspired is the word I would use to describe it. But that's it for this video. Don't forget to check out the links below to maybe buy the stationery we featured in this review, follow the Inktwell on social media, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.